Hey everyone, and welcome back to Country Music Made Me. Thank you so much for joining us once again. On today's episode, we are extremely excited to be welcomed by country music mainstay David Nail. Now, David moved to Nashville back in 2002 as a 23-year-old, and over the past 20 years, he's been riding the highs and lows of the industry with what I consider personally to be many more highs than lows. He's been on my playlist ever since the beginning, for sure. We had a great time talking about the people who have influenced this journey, and a moment earlier this year, in March of 2022, when he began listening to old demos that hadn't been cut. They hadn't made records from around 2008 to 2012, and the inspiration he took from that music that has carried over into his new recordings, including his latest single, Sunset Carousel. So please enjoy our conversation with David Nail. With Seattle, what is it about Seattle that you love so much? When did your love of that city really start to form?
Well, I mean, obviously it wasn't until I went there. I always tell people, I feel like that's a place that if you have a creative bone in your body, I think it just kind of speaks to you. There's places, there's different cities that I've been to over the years, and like I love like kind of wandering around by myself, and you sort of are just, I guess, pondering different things and whatever it is, just the surroundings. I don't know if it's the climate, I don't know if it's just the vibe of the city, but I usually always am inspired to want to sit down and just kind of write after having visited, there. And obviously it has a rich music history, as well as a sports history. And it's just, I think, it's so much, first of all, that whole part of the country, I feel like so few people have, at least of my friends, have seen that part of the country. And I tell them all the time, like, it's just so unique and different than, anything really anywhere else, especially, from where I was raised. And so, I've just always had a fondness for it. And we were just somewhat close to Seattle. We played Tacoma earlier this year, so we were close enough that I was a little bit out of shape that I wasn't able to visit the actual proper Seattle, but
Right.
We were close enough, and it was beautiful. We got to go down to Portland and Central Oregon, and it's just such a unique, part of the country, and one that I've grown extremely fond of from the very first. I mean, I can remember the very first time, I flew into there. You look out the window and you see this thing piercing through the clouds, and you're like, what in the world is that? And then the people around you can kind of tell that it's like your first time. And I can remember the first time I came and seeing Mount Rainier, and this lady looking at me, and she goes, that's actually a mountain that's like coming up through the clouds. And I was like, what? And I'm still a little scared of flying. And so I just remember thinking, well, like, what happens if you like just come down on top of it? Like or like you just like come down out of the clouds, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, hey, there's a mountain right there.
Right. Yeah. And that sort of enjoyment, like that joy of seeing that view as you're going in. Do you ever become numb to that as someone who travels a lot?
No, especially like places like that, I still get that little kid excitement, even, some of my favorite cities, whether it's Boston or New York or Chicago or these places, that you grow up, and, obviously being a huge sports fan, that's kind of the first, conversations that I ever had about these places. And so, it's just, I still get a little giddy, I love traveling. It's gotten a lot harder, since I've gotten, my family has grown. But it's still, I feel it's kind of weird. I think because where I grew up is so rural and so like kind of tucked away. I mean, it's easier now with the web, and I feel like people travel a little bit more, where I grew up than they used to.
Right.
When I was 21 before I saw the ocean for the first time,
Oh, wow.
And so it was, I think part of that excitement and giddiness is because I traveled so little as a child and even as an early adult. And it just, I tell people all this in our shows all the time. I said, I moved to Nashville to be a singer, but that's as far as I got. I didn't really, it didn't register that, okay, this is going to be your opportunity to see, the entire country and other countries. And so it's continues to blow my mind that we do have the opportunity to travel, but also that, more times than not, a lot of the crowds, we don't know a soul. So it's very flattering and inspiring. But, that's my favorite thing to do. Or my favorite thing about the road is just going to a place and kind of walking around and kind of soaking it in and letting it, I there's no show that I hate, but I always dislike walking up on stage when I haven't felt like I've invested into where it is that we played, whether it's, financially or just like this past weekend, we just played a small town in Wisconsin. And I can remember we get to go down to this little pancake house and we were eating with the locals. And then like we got to walk around down by the water. And that night, it just felt like I was in a small way a part of the community. I kind of knew I had a feeling for where we were and the type of people we were playing for. And it just makes it so much more enjoyable.
That is amazing. And another place that I know you enjoy is Las Vegas. And I wanted to ask about your Granddaddy Lawson. And I know that it hasn't been too long, I think just over about a year that you lost him. So I don't know how easy it is for you to talk about him, but I know he was a very influential person in this journey. So I was just wondering if you could just tell me a bit about him and sort of celebrate him.
It is a difficult subject to talk about. I mean, he was just my hero in every way, shape and form. I guess from about seventh grade on, we lived directly across the street from each other. And so there was, not a day went by that I didn't see him or talk to him and whether it was for 5 minutes or for 5 hours. And he was just always extremely proud of me. I was the youngest grandchild. And so I was kind of sort of the baby, and my sister and I were the only grandchildren that lived in the town in which, that grew up around him as much as we did. Everybody else had kind of, lived, at least 3 or 4 hours away. And so we were just all extremely close. And it was just, he was just a huge influence. He was an extremely hard worker. Like, I feel like a lot of people from that generation are kind of a self-made man. I'm actually not exactly positive if he graduated high school or not.
Okay.
But I know that he started working with farmers, he farmed a little bit, and he started working with farmers and doing a lot of accounting work and loans, farm loans and equipment loans. And then, when I was probably, I don't know, 10 or 11 years old, he just on a whim started building houses. And that's what he did until I guess he probably got too old. And he was injured building a house. He kind of fell off a roof once and he broke his back, and he had a lot of nerve damage in his feet. And so he lived in constant pain, but he never complained. He was an unbelievable husband. When my mama died, I think my biggest fear was, like often happens when someone's kind of inspiration for living kind of leaves this earth, a lot of times the other person sort of follows them very quickly. And so I just always feared that. But, when he did pass away, when it was kind of evident that his time was coming to an end, I remember my mom saying that he was committed and really like motivated to try to live until 100. And, he made it to 94, so he made it pretty close, but he was just, I think as difficult as his funeral was, it was just, so amazing to see so many people from so many demographics and so many walks of life celebrate him, that respected him. And, he just had this air about him. He could walk into a room with Velcro shoes and, his shirt untucked and a pair of, khaki pants, but he commanded a presence, and it was just, there was something extremely admirable about him. And, he was my biggest fan. You mentioned Las Vegas. That was his favorite place in the world. I think if he could have, he would have given anything to have seen me play there. And he was always fascinated about where I was playing and what part of the city it was. And, and I got to play the National Finals Rodeo twice. And actually, before he got too sick to travel, he was finally going to get to go to that. It was not when I played, but it was a couple of years before I played. He was going to go, and he was a huge rodeo fan. And so that was always, Vegas in general is always very sentimental for me to play for that reason. But also just anything rodeo related, because he was just such a huge rodeo fan. And I always found that extremely fascinating, because I didn't grow up around horses or cattle or bulls or anything like that. And so it was always fascinating to me how fascinated he was with the rodeo and loved watching it. And so one of the biggest thrills I've ever gotten was they presented me a buckle each time I played the NFR, and I got to bring that home and give that to him for Christmas, and this nice, super nice leather jacket. And the same thing, we played Cheyenne Frontier Days, which is a huge rodeo, arguably the biggest in the country, and, definitely one of the most historic. And I got to give him that belt buckle too. So it was just, he was just, he had a saying, and I always, he just would always look at me, a lot of times before I got my record deal and started making my own money, he would send me back with, a couple $20 bills, sometimes $100 bill. And he would just look at me and say, "Son, just keep your nose clean." And that was my biggest, goal in life, was just to make sure that I didn't disappoint him in any way, shape, or form. And I kind of still live that way today. And I talk about him all the time with my son, who I named him after. And that's, and I was always very grateful that my son had 5 years with him and was old enough to like appreciate and acknowledge his presence and what a great man he was. And the screensaver on my phone is one of the last times they actually got to communicate, and they're kind of like button head, they're kind of like got their foreheads touching each other, and he's just kind of hugging him, and they're just kind of having a moment. And it's definitely, seeing that person and being able to document it is something I'll never forget.
That is amazing. And within your love of sports and your eventual love of music, was he ever sort of a part of that? Or was it just sort of his hard work and determination that you really took forward from him through this life?
He watched sports. I mean, I played 3 sports a year pretty much from the time I could start playing. And, he always came to all my games. I know he wasn't a big fan of me playing football. He was always terrified I was going to get hurt. But, when I started singing, especially like at his funeral, there were so many people that came up and told me, how proud he was and how he would follow wherever I was at. And he would always tell like his friends, at the diner or whatever, when he was getting his haircut, he's like, "Well, my grandson's in Las Vegas today, or he's in Seattle today, or he's in, the middle of Pennsylvania." And he was just always like super, involved with where I was. And, I can remember when we bought our first house, obviously, he was just completely like dumbfounded by how much it costs to, live in a big city. And he would just shake his head, and he would then go and tell me about, how much his first house cost, or how old he was when he was able to just even, purchase a house. And one of my favorite stories that he ever tells is, all three of my children were conceived via IVF. And so obviously that costs, thousands and thousands of dollars. And when we would have to like tell him about that, he would just shake his head and he would say, when your Aunt Barbara was born, the doctor came to the house and I gave him $40 and a pat on the back. And then when your mom was born, I think it cost me $60 and a pat on the back. And he was like, when your Uncle Mike was born, the last of his children, he said it cost him a whole $100. And he was like, he just thought to himself, well, we can't afford to have any more kids after this. And they were just poor country people. The doctor would come out to their house and delivered all the babies there in their home. And I just always, he wasn't a bitter man about money. He was very, he always saved, a lot of money. And he was, for much of my life, the richest man I ever knew, and like I said earlier, just a self-made man. And so he appreciated sports, and, I think he kind of watched them, so that we had something else to talk about, and we would talk about the Cardinals game. He would stay up and watch the Cardinal game. As he got older, it was harder and harder for him to stay up and watch stuff, but he would watch enough that you could have a conversation with him about it. But, from the moment I started singing, he would tell everybody, David's going to be a singer. That's what he's going to do. And even, really before I ever, I guess fully committed or believed it was something possible, he was the the believer from the very beginning.
Right. And that journey for you through music and sports, where was the time? Like, talk about high school. You were doing both. You were doing high level baseball. You were, I believe, in all state choir as well. So during that time, as a youngster, where was your mind within music and sports?
Well, I think that, I had a pretty picture perfect childhood from the standpoint of, I've had two parents who loved each other and supported us. And, they, I guess pushed us to follow our dreams. Nothing was, really unattainable as far as they were concerned. And, my father was, obviously a band director, but he was also obsessed, literally obsessed with sports, and especially baseball. And so I grew up around it. And it just sort of soaked in through osmosis. But, I think internally, I really just started having some internal battles with, what I felt called to do versus what I felt like I was expected to do. And I really felt the pressure that I needed to pursue baseball until the door closed, whether that was, what was I good enough to play college? At what level college, and then, professional, which I wasn't as good enough to be a professional, but I did feel this pressure that I needed to pursue it until I was finally told, okay, hey, you're not good enough to play anymore.
Right.
And, but at the same time, I was falling in love with music, and I just grew obsessed with it. I just was back home, and my father was, talking about my cassette tape collection. And I went out in the garage and actually got about 4 or 5 of them. I probably had 500, and I probably got 4 or 5 of them. My parents had my granddaddy's old truck, and so I went and took the twins out in his truck and played a couple of these cassette tapes. And it was just so nostalgic and such a wonderful moment. I think I drove his truck like 4 or 5 times just in a couple of days, just any chance I could. And it was just, but it was, probably 16, 17 years old when I started performing regularly, and I was having success, in choir, and winning some awards, and it was, sports had come so easy to me, and music seemed to come even easier. And I didn't necessarily know how to explain it. I don't even know that I know how to explain it now. People ask me all the time, what do you think, people dig about what you do? I said, I have no clue, man. I just close my eyes and I sing,
Right. Yeah.
but I don't know what it is that happens or transpires when, I get up on stage, and certainly even back then, I listen to tapes and see performances and I just cringe because I was so green and so bad. But at the time I just thought, man, this is, I didn't understand why like my best friend in the world couldn't sing a lick. And I didn't understand, okay, well, why can't I sing and why can't he, and
Right.
he was
Yeah.
always a little better than me in sports. And so it was like, okay, well, I guess I have this one area where I can kind of one up you a little bit. But, I watched my father, who music was so just effortless for him. And he was such a, just ridiculously talented human being. Could obviously read music, but he could play pretty much anything by ear. His tonal memory, being able to hear something one time and play it, pretty much verbatim is unlike anybody that I've ever heard. And so I think I just always, it took a while for me to realize how significantly more talented he was than other people who casually played.
Right.
But I just, the more and more that I sang, I always say I've never done drugs, but the applause, the adrenaline, the rush from being on stage, and especially songs, now that you've written and you poured your heart and soul into, you get up here and you play for people, and you see like that they're moved, or you get that applause and to see the appreciation. It's the rush like no other, no drug could ever, remotely duplicate that feeling. And so, and it was an addiction, and I was always very nervous and very anxious anytime I performed, but I also relished the opportunity. And I just, as I began to fall more in love into music, sports became less and less of a passion. I still enjoyed, I still loved playing them, but I would, listen to music. Couldn't wait to get out of school, listen to music all the way to practice. Couldn't wait to get out of practice to go to Walmart and see what else, what other new CDs came out or tapes came out. I always tell people I fell in love in the 90s with everybody else, country music's huge boom. But the reality is, like, that wasn't enough to feed my hunger. I unlike most people who were totally content with whatever music was current at the time, I started researching back into the 80s and the 70s and the 60s, and just became completely immersed in, not just country music, but just music in general, and trying to soak up as much as possible. And my dad used to always tell people that I was a cross between Kenny Loggins and Garth Brooks. And that used to always bug me because I was like, I want to sound like David Nail. And so really from those, from high school on, it was just a constant kind of yearning to figure out, okay, what is David Nail going to sound like? Because I don't want to sound like, while that was I knew that was a compliment. It sort of like motivated me to like figure out, okay, what is exactly is my sound going to be.
Right. And along this journey, like you talk about your grandpa just being a hard working person who just loved his family. And it feels like you have taken that from him.
I think there have been moments where I've been, I'm extremely grateful. There have definitely been moments where I've kind of stopped and smelled the roses, so to speak. I think that just, I will say that I don't think, anything in my career is, not that anyone's career is easy, but, we've had to really work, and we've had to really like push, all the songs we released to radio, we really had to just almost shove them down their throat, to get them played. But I get that. I get the whole like, oh, well, you're undervalued, or you're not appreciated as much as you should be. I moved to this town without a single connection. I didn't have a soul to go to lunch with, much less someone to kind of show me the rope, so to speak.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so just the whole concept of even, getting a record deal, was like winning the Super Bowl, and so I just feel like that for me, I learned very quickly in Nashville, that the thing you get asked the most is what's next. You put out a record on Friday, and on Saturday somebody wants to know what you're doing next. It's
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
geez, I just worked for 2 years on this album, and now you've appreciated it for 24 hours. Now you want to know what I want to do next. And so I think that just sort of kind of became my philosophy. And I always told people, I hope I have a good enough year this year to have a next year. And we've kind of done that more or less. And One Shape or Form, been in the business for about 20 years. And so definitely had way more success than I ever could have imagined. But I think, it's really not my personality, so to speak, to just relish like in the sun,
Right.
like
Yeah.
I don't really, that's one part of the business that I feel like is such an unnatural like experience, because it's like, this is what I do, this is how I provide for my family. I feel like this is what the good Lord put me on this earth to do. But like, just sit here and bask in the glory of like accomplishments or applause or whatever. It's like I kind of just want to run back to the bus and hide, like and go back, because I've always, I feel like I'm as regular a person as anybody else. And I feel like that's one of the biggest compliments you can get, is somebody talks to you for 10 minutes and they'll say, man, I knew you put your pants on the same way as me, but now like I can totally tell you're just a regular old guy. And I'm like, well, yeah, I went to the grocery store twice today, getting groceries for my family. I went to the bank today, like I'm running errands. Like, it's just, the only difference is, instead of, people who have, maybe standard job, 9 to 5 jobs. My job's not 9 to 5. It's about 90 minutes, sometimes at 9 o'clock at night or whatever. But, it's just different, but as a person, I don't feel like I'm any different.
Right. And in which world do you sort of feel almost more important? Like you're maybe a little different in the music world or in the sports world? Because I mean, the sports world, you've really been able to develop some great friendships as well in mixing music and sports together. So what is that like, of being able to immerse yourself within the sports world at the same time as your musical career?
Well, that's been the big, other than being able to provide for my family, just like the relationships that I've developed over the years and the opportunities I've gotten to have, it's funny, like I have this love of sports, and you think, hey, I'm going to go be a singer, and like, that's going to be my focus for the next however many years. Like, I'm saying goodbye to this. And when in reality, like, this decision to be a singer and follow music kind of opened all of these other doors to get to kind of scratch that itch. So in a lot of ways, it is true, it is true that I feel like I've kind of gotten to, have my cake and eat it too, in regards to that. So, I definitely think that, one of the biggest thrills for me is to just be able to like, turn on the television and see somebody that I know, whether they're an agent of somebody or, most of my friends have retired, I guess, from playing sports. But, I have people that are friends that are coaching. I coached a youth team when I was in my mid-20s, and I've got a kid that's a pitching coach for the Phillies. So got to go see them play the Padres recently in San Diego, and just, sitting in the crowd and being able to think, like, here's this kid who I knew, from the age he was 16 years old, and now he's a pitching coach in the major leagues. It's just, you kind of have those dad moments where you're just proud for your friends, and you see them, getting, having success in their various fields. It's a lot of fun. It's just like, but it's just like, I mean, I've got friends that are doctors and they have success, or, friends that are in the, lawyers, or in other facets of life, and other facets of business and stuff. And you don't get any more excited for anybody else, but it is ironic how they have sort of mirrored each other. And it's true what they say, musicians want to be athletes and athletes want to be musicians.
Right.
I just did a Christian camp. I just went and visited some kids at this Christian camp on Tuesday for about 45 minutes. And here it is, all these counselors are athletes and they're asking me all these questions. And I'm looking at the kids and I'm like, these kids don't, at this age, they don't really care. They don't want to hear about some, country singer. They want to hear, what it's like to be a professional athlete or play big time college football or whatever. And as soon as the kids went away, like every single guy picks up a guitar and starts playing like the 2 songs that they learned in their, fraternity house or at their dorm room, because and that's what I told the kids. I said, at some point in your life, you're going to look across the room, there's going to be a guitar. And I was like, 9 times out of 10, people, they want to play it, or they're inspired to play it. And I was like, hopefully this kind of, puts a little bug in your ear, and so that when that time comes, you'll pick that thing up and at least know a chord or 2 to play. But I told all the older kids, the counselors, I said, I'm fascinated in what you do, and I want to hear your stories, but I don't get to because you're too busy asking me questions.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Is that an interesting thing as you go along this journey? That sort of mix of, yeah, wanting to get to know people, but most of the time, the people are more interested in you and hearing your stories. So you're doing a lot of the talking most of the time, I believe.
Yeah, and I will say this, a lot of times, I've done this for so long, and not let you ever take it for granted, but a lot of times it takes talking and telling stories, or someone asking a question for you to, oh man, I forgot about that, or like, it reminds you of like, man, I can't remember that I did that, or like, and then suddenly like you go back into the moment and you're like, holy cow, that was like pretty ridiculous. Like, what was I thinking? People ask me all the time about how was it to sing in the World Series, and I said it was such a weird dynamic because I'm there to do a job, not be a fan. But at the same time, it's like my childhood team playing in the game, and so there was like a part of me that was like freaking out, because here I am at the World Series and I'm getting to watch my team, but the majority of me was like, hey man, you can't suck. Like, you have to go out here and sing this song. Like, you have to do a good job. Like, you can't, no one's going to care that like you're a fan if you go out there and forget the words or something. So
Right. Yeah.
I can remember like when the adrenaline rush, kind of started to ease away. Like the fandom kind of like covered, jumped on top and kind of covered whatever adrenaline I needed. And but it is I've been super blessed, like I said, to the fact that I tell people all the time, a lot of times on stage, I made the decision to move to Nashville when I was 17 years old to be a country music singer, and the opportunities and the friendships and the relationships I've developed in every walk of life is because of that super important decision that I had, was super naive about, is mind-boggling.
Right. Yeah. And now within this journey, you mentioned your best friend growing up earlier in our conversation, and that he was maybe a little better at sports than you. And I believe that was Chris Sledge. Was that the guy you're talking about? And I wanted to ask about him because he's still a good friend of yours. And so when you talk about, being able to reminisce and think about these stories, how important has his friendship been in being able to talk about these stories and have this journey with him?
Well, it's wild. I was with him yesterday at a water park here in the city with all, our whole families were together. They drove over for the day. I've known him since I was 4 years old. We were in nursery school together. We were in the same kindergarten class. He's about 10 months older than me, but he started school late, so we were in the same class. But he's got an unbelievable heart. Like, I've never met anybody in my entire lifetime who puts others before themselves more than he does. He's always just had an unbelievable ability to lead. His father started a sporting goods company, and after he graduated college, he more or less just kind of took the reins of that, and it was I don't want to say effortless, but it was almost like it was seamless, like it was destined, almost like just kind of growing up in that house. He kind of knew the business inside and out without ever like training for it technically.
Right.
But just a unbelievable father. I knew he'd be, he had his first son Zayden before we had kids, and it was a couple of years before we had the twins. And so I always knew he'd be a great dad. But just to watch it in person is really inspiring. His son, I believe, is 10 and is a really, really good baseball player, and loves sports. And it's sort of like kind of revisiting our childhood, like watching his son, kind of fall in love with all these sports. And, but, some of the coolest experiences I've ever had, where I think of the 3 All-Star games I was in the celebrity game and went to, he's gone to 2 of them. He went to the last ACM awards that I went to in person. And, one of the biggest, unfortunate things about what we do is so oftentimes, like, the people closest to us aren't there to share it with.
Right.
And so it was always, I always tried to at least manufacture as many of those moments as I possibly could that I could control. But he's just, the best story I can tell about him is he's traveled to Las Vegas. He loves Las Vegas too. He's traveled to Las Vegas for years in the business he's in. And when we went out there together, I was doing interviews all day, and I told him, I said, I will be done at 3:00. And he was like, well, you can come meet me I'll be at my favorite restaurant in all of Vegas. And I was like, all right. And so after I got done, I texted him and I said, hey, where are you at? And he goes, I'm at the Mandalay Bay. And I was like, okay, yeah, I've been to some nice restaurants in the Mandalay Bay. And I get over there and I walk into the lobby and I kind of go over to where most of the restaurants are. And I said, I'm here. Which one of these places you're in? He goes, I'm in the buffet. And I was like, your favorite restaurant in Las Vegas is the buffet in the Mandalay Bay? And he goes, yeah, man, they have unbelievable fried shrimp. And I was like, you got some of the most famous chefs in all of the world that have restaurants in Las Vegas, and you're excited about going to a buffet. And I mean, the amount of run I had on that story that night, everybody I came in contact with, I told, and everybody just fell in love with him just based on that story, because it just says so much about him as a person, and just how, like, he's been extremely successful, has made, good money, and is able to do, I won't say anything he wants, but he could certainly go to as many nice restaurants as he wants. And the fact that, like, that buffet made such an impact on him that he was willing to, like, put his name on, like, this is the best, my favorite restaurant in all of Las Vegas. He's just as down to earth and as anybody I've ever met. And I think my favorite thing about him is he's one of those people that, we can go a couple of weeks without talking, and it always seems like he'll text me whenever I'm, like, kind of having a bad day, or I'm down on myself, or just for whatever reason I'm not feeling super excited about what I'm doing or super proud of myself or whatever, I'm kind of down on myself, it's almost like he can kind of read the moment, and he sends a text, and it might just be like, hey, I love you, bro, or you're the best, or he'll send a picture of us from 10 years ago. And he just is really good about reading the moment sort of without having the ability to see the moment.
That's awesome. And now have to talk about your music because we're running out of time here, but I wanted to ask you about, I think it was March 2022. So March of this year, you had posted that you had listened to some old work tapes from between 2008 and 2012 and sort of how that inspired you. And I wanted to talk about that time earlier this year when you were listening to those and how that has inspired your work now moving forward this year.
Well, I mean, to be brutally honest, I think I was, like I said earlier, everybody was like, what are you going to do next? What do you like? Everybody on my team, everybody that works with me and stuff. And then also like people like personally, they were just like, well, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, I'm playing shows, that's great. But I was kind of, I don't want to say going through the motions, like, because I don't want it to sound like I was taking anything for granted, but I sort of was just sort of wading through the water, I guess, so to speak. And somebody sent me an MP3 of something that we had written together. I think it was Scooter Carousel, who I've written a lot of songs with, has written a bunch of songs for me. And it just sort of planted the seed of like, man, I need to go back and just listen to some of the stuff that I did, some of the stuff that didn't make the records. And, because back then I was co-writing so much. And so, I think just listening to that stuff, this is going to sound really weird. And I'm kind of nervous about saying it, but it was almost like it sort of reminded me that like, hey man, I'm good. Like, I'm good at this. Like, I can write songs, I can sing songs, like I can do this. And it's kind of weird, I guess, for that to happen, 40 something years old. It's like, well, what do you mean? Like, you got guitars all over the place, you got some plaques all over, like, why do you need like songs that evidently weren't good enough to make records to tell you that you were good enough? But I think, you just kind of, at times you kind of go through these points in your life where you're just maybe subconsciously second guessing yourself. And so really when I started listening to that stuff, it really like inspired me to like kind of start grinding more. And it had been a while, well before COVID, since I had really like kind of put my head down and like really grinded, at writing songs and stuff. And so I called my publisher and I called my management team and I just said, hey, I want to start co-writing with people. I hadn't really co-written in like 2 years.
Oh, okay.
And I said, I want to start writing more. And I said, I want to start writing with different people, and like whoever like the young, like exciting people are, I want to get hooked up with them. And that's how I got hooked up with Grant Vogel and Robin Collins, who I wrote Sunset Carousel with, and have now written 8 songs. We're 8 for 8.
Oh, wow.
And it's just, I think it's kind of weird. It's like you go back in the past and you listen to something, from, 10 or 12 years ago, and it kind of inspires you, kind of gives you this youthful, like kind of exuberance that, hey, I'm not done yet. Like, I want to keep doing this, and I want to keep getting better, and I want to keep, pushing myself. And, yesterday was, I was working yesterday, and I can remember 3 or 4 times just thinking, man, this is so hard to do. Like, how in the world can people do this like every day, just like come up with things out of thin air, and put it to music? And it just, it was a super humbling moment. But the whole concept of like doing that is like what motivates you to like keep trying, keep wanting to do it, keep wanting to get better. And I guess it takes some people 10, 12 years younger than yourself to kind of make you, maybe it's like a false sense of like youthfulness that you feel because everybody around you's so much younger than you, but it's funny you mentioned that time period, because that really was, I mean, I feel like listening to those songs, and I went in and demoed a few, and I think it just kind of lit a fire, and I feel like it made me a better performer. I feel like it kind of just got me a little bit more laser focused. You know, I have ADD, so I can have a tendency to be like all over the place, and that probably keeps me from really like being great at any one thing, because I'm just all over the map. And
Right.
But I definitely think that it made me kind of zero in more on like, okay, hey, like if I'm going to keep doing this, I need to evolve. I need to get better. I need to, you know, figure out what's next. And the only way you can kind of figure out what's next is to kind of keep working. And so as a result of that, you know, I kind of found this new sort of vision on, you know, at least what I want the next few months to kind of sound like. And again, you know, back to that ADD, who knows what it's going to be like, you know, after that 3 or 4 months, it could be something completely different. But it is very ironic that it took going back to something I did 10 or 12 years ago that evidently weren't good enough to make records, but they were good enough to like totally motivate me like a decade later to, you know, keep at it, keep working, and try to get as good as I possibly can.
Thank you once again so much for listening, and thank you to David for stopping by and sharing his story. Be sure to check out his latest single, Sunset Carousel. Please also be sure to give us a like, a follow, or maybe even leave us a review if you enjoyed today's episode. It means so much to us. You can also head over to countrymusicmademe.com to sign up for our newsletter. With that, you'll stay up to date on all of our upcoming guests, as well as receive exclusive content. Just head over to countrymusicmademe.com and hit that subscribe button. Thank you once again so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on Country Music Made Me.